And I can't hide. These growing pains are keeping me up at night.
The information that we share today is from our own personal experiences and does not constitute medical advice. We do not endorse any products or services. Any said products or services mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you or your condition. Please consult with your physician if you have medical questions as it may pertain to your condition.
Hi, Kristen. Welcome to Take a Pain Check, and hello to everyone that's tuning in today. I'm really thrilled to dive deep into a very interesting conversation with Dr. Kristen Brogan. So, Kristen holds a PhD in cognitive and behavioral sciences, a master's in psychology, and is a board-certified behavior analyst. Could you kind of start off by introducing yourself and your diagnosis?
Sure. Hello, Natasha. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here. As Natasha mentioned, my name is Kristen, and I have been living with rheumatoid arthritis and Sjogren's for about 3 years now. And I recently earned a PhD in cognitive and behavioral sciences. And so I've been delving into the world of using our science to help individuals living with chronic illness.
You have Sjogren's and rheumatoid arthritis. Having both of that, when was like the start of these symptoms? Because I know rheumatoid arthritis and Sjogren's are somewhat in the same category, but they can be really different in terms of like dry eyes and dry mouth. How did that kind of start for you?
The first symptom that I experienced that led me to start going to the doctor and kind of saying, okay, there's something wrong here beyond just like a typical injury, was my right shoulder. I was sleeping back in, I guess this was September 2017. I was sleeping and I woke up just a severe, like sharp shooting pain in my shoulder. And I don't do anything that should have caused any sort of injury. So it was very perplexing. And I thought maybe I heard it sleeping, but I'm like, I'm not a violent sleeper. So that didn't make any sense either. So I went to the doctor and they took x-rays, they gave me anti-inflammatories and were like, it's probably just an injury, you'll be fine. So that was that. After a couple weeks, it started feeling a little bit better, but after about a week of relief, it came back, but this time it was in my left shoulder. So I was like, well, this certainly isn't an injury because now we're shifting. And so at that point, I went back to the doctor and I said, I actually think I know what this is. And I thought it was rheumatoid arthritis. And the reason why I thought that is because my dad has rheumatoid arthritis. And so I feel like I was lucky in that sense. Not that I'm happy my dad has rheumatoid arthritis, but I knew what it was very quickly because I saw him live with this. And so I kind of knew how it manifested. So at that point, they were like, well, yeah, it is, there is a genetic component potentially. So let's go ahead and do all of the blood work in the labs. When they first got the blood work back, my rheumatoid factor was negative, but my ANA was positive, and so was my CRP. So then they sent me to a rheumatologist who did additional blood work. And at that point, my rheumatoid factor was through the roof and everything else was still positive. And so she gave me the diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis as well as Sjogren's. And that Sjogren's diagnosis was there because I do get the dry eyes and the dry mouth. And then my mom also has Sjogren's. And so she was like, it's probably pretty likely that you have it as well. So I'm kind of a perfect combination of my parents.
Whoa, okay. I've never heard like anything super genetic as in like mom has Sjogren's, dad has rheumatoid arthritis, child has both. That's really interesting.
I know. I always laugh about it.
I feel like it's also maybe a little bit rare. Would you say you're like unique and special in that way? It's probably easier for you to like manage it. I don't know. I feel like your parents can give you a lot of tips and tricks of what they've been through. How has that kind of helped you, like your parents' support?
Yes, absolutely. I always say that I feel really lucky. And again, it feels kind of strange to say that because I don't like that they have this. But I feel really, really lucky because from day one, I had, two incredible people who I could look up to. And, my mom, Sjogren's is one of those autoimmune disease and, rheumatoid arthritis as well. But Sjogren's is very well known for having very long delays to diagnoses because it's very it's not very well understood. And so she went 30 years before she got a diagnosis. And so I, as a child, had to watch her consistently going to doctors and having just like these complaints where doctors had no idea what was wrong with her. They told her it was psychosomatic, and they were wrong. And she had to go through all of that. And so I feel like on one hand, I feel lucky because I got to see her go through that. And I at least got that, at least her pain was turned into purpose with me, because I feel like I understand my diseases a lot better because I'm able to look to my parents and see how they are handling certain things. And like you said, they provide support that, if I had parents who didn't have these diseases, I don't think that, I wouldn't get the same support. Like my parents will give me little care packages that have like dry eye relief and like, like heating pads in them. And I'm like, I don't know, not a lot of parents, I don't think totally understand like what I'm going through. So that part is really, I feel lucky about that.
Yeah, because if I think about it, in general, parents are super supportive, but I mean, parents going through the exact same kind of experience as you, and like, just, I guess they understand it more. And although like no one fully understands, just like having little components of like that happened to me and I experienced this, and also those care packages, very, very cool. I mean, we shouldn't be saying this is lucky and cool, but I think as a person like living with a chronic condition, just these little things are really interesting to learn about. And it's great that you have that family support. I know a lot of people do, but you have that extra. So do you have any siblings?
I do, yeah. So I have one sister who's 4 years older than me. And I kind of told her, because I was like, hey, you might want to get checked out too if you have any extra little pains here and there and they don't know what's going on. She doesn't have any autoimmune diseases currently, but she's definitely, it's like on the radar. But yeah, no, she's completely understanding. My sister is one of the most understanding people in the world. So yeah, she totally gets it.
What about any of your friends? How did that kind of start? And then were your parents there at when you got diagnosed, or were they not?
Every appointment that I get out of, I either immediately go to their house afterwards or I call them on the phone afterwards. So they weren't there with me when I got the diagnosis, but I was calling them on the phone the second I walked out of the doctor's office. And, my friends, that can be a tough one for sure, because it's like you're going through this like monumental thing in your own life, but not everybody can see it. And you're never going to help these people fully understand. Like there's no way, unless somebody's going through it, will they ever understand. I do have an Instagram account where I talk about my kind of journey with rheumatoid arthritis and Sjogren's. And I'm very, very lucky that my friends were, supportive enough where I felt comfortable kind of letting them into that part of my world, because that can be kind of a hard thing to share with people sometimes, because we get afraid of opening ourselves up to judgment, I guess, from people from the outside. It's hard to talk openly about your chronic illness with people who don't understand it. But I was really, really lucky that the couple of people that I initially started kind of letting into that circle were incredibly supportive. So I think because of that, then it just slowly kind of snowballed into feeling more and more comfortable, to the point where I did eventually share like publicly in my life, that this is something I'm living with. And, I shared it on my Facebook that I have this Instagram account. So I got a bunch of people following me who I hadn't talked to in a couple of years. And every once in a while I think about like, oh man, what are these people going to think when I'm talking about this like chronic pain that I deal with on a, regular basis. But I think that's how we eventually achieve greater understanding and greater empathy. So I'm happy to kind of be able to help change some people's minds.
And I think social media is the best way to go. Initially, it's definitely a challenge, because just to get yourself out there is a challenge. Like the same thing for me. I think it was like a big challenge to kind of be like, okay, I will take this step. Still not the most comfortable. Like if you see my Instagram where I repost podcast stuff, like in the back of my mind, I'm like, hopefully no one sees this, but I still want to promote it. Because like you said, the more understanding you have, the more empathy you have, and then the more awareness we kind of create, which is something that a lot of people are doing, and social media is helping. with that, and I'm glad that we're able to use like social media to our advantage in a way so we can create awareness and education.
I was just going to ask you because I know that you were diagnosed in what I was reading online. Was it 11 or 13?
I was diagnosed when I was 13.
Okay. I can imagine that must be such a unique experience in your own right, because when you're 13, I can imagine not a lot of your friends on social media are posting about the things I may be posting about on my chronic illness account.
Yeah. So it was actually just like, I'd say 5 months ago when I started this podcast. That's when I'm like, okay, I need to start advocating for myself so advocating for myself was kind of throughout high school because like, you know, when you go through accommodations and all that, you kind of have to advocate for yourself. But then when this podcast happened, it was like, okay, I need to start advocating for others. And then in terms of like friends, I feel like, in my opinion, I feel like if your friends don't, I guess don't take an interest, that's okay. Like they don't have to, but even like trying to accommodate you here and there when you like go out, or even like changing up plans because maybe you feel tired. And then just supporting the podcast and following. I have so many of my friends that do, and I'm like really grateful for them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. One of my, I have a couple of friends actually who, you know, they don't have autoimmune disease, but their interest in what I deal with was like mind blowing. And the way that they would ask me questions and they showed real concern, and it just made me feel so seen. And I was just like, thank you guys for being here. And I think, you know, that's something, I guess, a silver lining, right, about talking about this kind of stuff and being vulnerable and putting yourself out there is you really do kind of see like who really has your back, like for you, rather than who's just there when it's convenient. So
that is very accurate. I like that. It's so true. I think like a lot of friends, especially my friends, they do take an interest, and I'm so grateful for people that do, and family. Like they're so supportive. We kind of jumped into friends, family, but didn't really get to what joints are affected right now, and kind of like you said your shoulder was affected. Is that still affected? How did that change to now?
yeah, so again, very, very lucky in terms of my diagnosis story. I had to wait from the time of my first indicator, like my shoulder pain, to my diagnosis, I believe was 6 months. So I did not wait very long for a diagnosis, and I was very lucky. But it got bad in those 6 months, and bad. Not that I have permanent joint damage. I'm very grateful that I do not have any permanent joint damage. But it was widespread throughout all of my joints. The only joints that weren't affected were my elbows. So it was everywhere. And it was very painful. And thankfully, my rheumatologist, I feel like I also got really lucky with her. She is very, you know, early aggressive treatment is the best way to go about this. And so I started using methotrexate, you know, a disease modifying anti-rheumatic drug, the day after I was diagnosed. And it was a pretty high dose. She, you know, gradually got me up there. And then after about 3 months, we checked back in. I wasn't quite where we wanted me to be. I was still having pain. So we added a biologic, we added Humira, and I'm still on that combination now, methotrexate and Humira. So now, you know, my pain now is kind of funny, and even my rheumatologist doesn't quite understand what's going on. Because it tends to, like, I don't ever have swelling, which is great. And I usually don't have ongoing pain in any one particular joint, but it'll kind of jump and move around. And it'll be there for like half a day, or maybe even only like a minute or two. And it'll kind of move and rotate throughout my body. And I also get a little bit of like muscle pain and nerve pain. And so that's probably more Sjogren's type of stuff. So I still have pain, but it doesn't, you know, really impact my daily life, other than a couple of things that we've kind of talked about. We've talked about switching biologics, but I'm too scared to do that right now because I feel like it was so bad, and I don't want to go back there. I don't want to lose all the progress that I've had. So I don't know, that's been a tough one for me too, is, you know, when do you decide to switch medications? I would rather wait for like a really big sign that I should switch, rather than switch too early and then not be able to get what I have now back. So my rheumatologist is always kind of like, all right, yeah, when I say that, but
You mentioned switching medications and when to kind of know. I think I've experienced a lot of that where I didn't actually have a medication that actually worked for me till like last year, or 2 years ago. And so I was like 3 years skipping, jumping, hopping through medications, figuring out which one would work. And like that's to the point where I started from prednisone and I went all the way to biologics and then the infusion. So I kind of like hit all the levels. And then I went like back down. So like I'm really grateful now that I do have medication that works for me. So I'm on triple therapy. So like sulfasalazine, Plaquenil, and methotrexate combined. But it's definitely hard to make that decision by yourself because you don't know like if I change, like is it because it's still like it's still gonna be a longer time till the medication's gonna work? It's just the day today it's not hurting. Or tomorrow it's hurting, so the medication's not working.
Yeah. And I'm curious for you and your journey, since you have tried so many different medications, were, you know, you and your rheumatologist, were you guys looking primarily at your biomarkers, or was it also just like what you were experiencing on a day-to-day?
Oh yeah, true. That's a really good question because we looked at the biomarkers and then also what I would feel. So we looked at both, and I think that was the confusing part because when you kind of look at both, on that day I might be feeling great, but my biomarkers are very high. So how do you make that determination? And what I've kind of realized, and since I guess the pain that you mentioned, that was like, okay, 1 second I have pain, but then the half a day I would have pain. I'm kind of like that as well. Like I don't have consistent pain. If you ask me right now, I actually have no pain at all, right? I do have swelling in my joints, but unless I like aggravate it a lot, it's fine. I can walk. And also like it depends on what I eat because I find that if I eat something that's like really triggering, like a lot of sugar and dairy or something, then I know the next day I can't walk because I think when you kind of nail your pain system like down and you know that this is how it works, then you're able to kind of manage it, and it definitely takes a lot of time. So I guess it's very confusing, I'd say, like in general.
That's so validating to hear you say that because I feel like it's so confusing and I'm just like, why is this so hard for me to figure this out?
Yeah, it's definitely hard to first find out if your medication's working because I feel like your doctors kind of rely on you and what you say so you're under that pressure to be like, okay, it's I'm not feeling any pain, but I might tomorrow, but you won't be here for me to figure it out. I think it's definitely the support of my parents. They kind of also made that I guess like that kind of determination, okay, I think we should wait like 3 more months. And then the rheumatologist and my parents discuss things, but it's a challenge and I totally understand.
That's a good point too. Like the people that you live with can kind of help keep you grounded on that plane too, you know, kind of remind you like, okay, because I have a tendency to be overly like optimistic about things regarding my health, and it's fine, I'll be fine. And you know, my partner will be like, well, you know, maybe, but you also are complaining a lot about the pain. So and it's like, okay, you're right.
If I change my medication, will I have more damage? Like as a 13-year-old child, how am I supposed to know anything? And I think it's really hard when you're really young, but also it's also hard when you're older because you're still not as educated about what's going on in your body. So while you were going through your PhD years and getting these diagnoses, how did you feel? How did this kind of impact your school life, and how did you balance everything?
Yeah, it was definitely tough. Like, you know, I think one of the things that, you know, before I got the diagnosis, it was kind of like, we just have to get through it. Right. And so I'm just going to take it day by day. I'm going to try not to dwell on it too much because I don't have an answer yet. I'm just going to almost try to ignore it. And so I don't know that that was the healthiest way of dealing with that, but that's like what I had to do at that point. Because the first year of your PhD, every program is different, but mine was the heaviest in terms of your course load. And at the same time, I had a full load in terms of research. I was also supervising master students. So, I mean, it was a very intense schedule. And so when I got the diagnosis, I feel like it was very freeing in a way because I was like, okay, I have answers and now I can make a plan to actually address this and to move forward and learn how to bring it all together. So Yeah. And then also learning to say no, which is a really hard thing to learn. I think, especially, graduate school is a really interesting time where you are expected to do a lot of extra work for, you're not getting paid anymore. You're expected to kind of just take one for the team. And I did have to learn how to say no. And that was really, really hard in the beginning, but I kind of had to keep reminding myself that this new behavior, even if it wasn't getting met with like rewards from the outside world, this was what was right for me. And so I kind of had to be my own source of empowerment and, reminding myself that this is what you want. Like, if it's right for you, just keep going. It's going to work out in the end.
Yeah, this does sound very challenging. I feel like I don't want to reach that point where I have to make that decision. So you making that decision is very empowering. I think it'll be empowering to many others. How do you kind of keep yourself motivated on a day-to-day basis with these diagnoses?
I think that the biggest kind of like root underlying way that you can keep yourself motivated is work in therapy, or at least for me. That was very, very helpful for me. The day after, I did a lot of things the day after my diagnosis, apparently, because the day after my diagnosis, I made an appointment with a therapist, just to make sure that I was processing these diagnoses all, because I know people with chronic illness are predisposed to experience mental health challenges. And I experienced my fair share of mental health challenges as an adolescent. So I felt like I was kind of double pre-exposed. And so I was like, all right, let's get in here and do the work in therapy so that I can kind of have all these tools to manage kind of the daily ups and downs. And there's a lot of scary thoughts that go through your head on a semi-regular basis when you're living with chronic illness. And I think therapy has been a really big piece of that puzzle to kind of keep me going.
Do you think therapy has kind of sparked your interest for your career in a way, in terms of like behavior and how that kind of started? I want to know a bit more about what the root was from your diagnoses and then how you got into what work you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned, I struggled with mental health challenges when I was an adolescent, and I had been to psychiatrists and psychologists. I didn't have a lot of success with either one. And so when I kind of learned and was getting into behavioral science, it just seemed like such an interesting way to think about behavior. So, we're really getting down to how people learn, what keeps people motivated, how to change behaviors. And then you throw in cognitive neuroscience, and like you're really considering a lot of the pieces of the puzzle. Obviously, it doesn't have all the answers, but it's got a lot of the answers. So I think that kind of led me on the road to cognitive and behavioral sciences, was my own experience in adolescence. And then once I was diagnosed with, chronic illness, I was being told by my rheumatologist to change a lot of my life, right? Like I had to start taking medications on a regular basis. I had to change the way I was, treating my body on a regular basis. I had to learn how to communicate better with my partner because I was not good at asking for help. I still struggle with that. I had to change a lot of my behaviors. And so I very quickly started using the tools that I was using with my own clients, with myself, and kind of changing some of these behaviors and helping myself manage this day to day, using using cognitive and behavioral science. And so once that became successful and I was, felt like I was doing pretty good, emotionally and mentally and behaviorally, in comes the pandemic and it put a halt to my dissertation. And so I had a little bit of free time. And so I decided to start offering coaching services to the community, on Instagram, and just doing it, pay what you can. I just wanted to kind of give back to my community. And I had a lot of fun doing it. It was so amazing and therapeutic for myself to work with other, spoonies, other individuals with chronic illness, who were experiencing similar things that I was, and to kind of help connect them with the science and what does science say about this challenge that you're facing, and how can we help get you over that hurdle so that you can continue to live a life that's in connection with your values. And so when, after my dissertation started going, picking back up again, I kind of laid off that for a while. And then I graduated and I was like, I'm not really sure what I want to do. But the coaching just kept kind of coming back. And so I decided to kind of dive headfirst into that. I'm actually going to be launching Connect Behavioral Coaching.
Have a platform on social media giving, I guess, your thoughts on certain subjects in terms of behavioral science. What are some common goals that you've seen many patients or people of the community have when it comes to behavioral science and their chronic illness?
Yeah, so I've had people come, a big one I feel like is symptom tracking. So a lot of times we want to have data, right? We know data is helpful. We were talking earlier about how, you get into your rheumatologist office and you're talking to your rheumatologist and you feel good then, but what about the last, 3 months where you were up and down and there were some days that were worse than others? How do I communicate all of that to this person? So that's where I can come in. So data tracking and data collection and the analyzing of data is like my thing. That's what we do in behavioral science. And so I worked with a lot of clients to collect data, either on their symptoms or on different lifestyle changes that their doctor has recommended. So I'm not recommending the change, but rather I'm helping to connect them with the tools to actually make those changes. So I've had clients ask for symptom tracking and relation to GI issues, in relation to things that have actually not even been diagnosed yet. And they just want to get some data so that they can bring it to the rheumatologist and say, this is what I'm dealing with. Because, sometimes you get into the doctor's office and your mind goes blank and it's really hard to remember all of the stuff that happened over the past 3 months. So I really enjoyed helping with that and kind of see people progress on their road to diagnoses or whatever it may be. Things like communication. So helping people learn to communicate more effectively with the people in their lives. So those are a few common things that I've helped people with, but it's very broad. When you talk about behavioral science, if it's a behavior, that's something that we work on.
I definitely do not track my symptoms. So I just feel like it's a lot of effort, but I totally see how it can definitely help others and even probably help myself, but I'm just not in the mood for that. And I guess when you kind of get into that, it is beneficial. What are your thoughts on like some people that track their symptoms in a different way, as in like not actually write them down?
So I'm so glad you asked that, because that's one of the first conversations that I have with people who come to me for symptom tracking, is that it is a lot of work. And it's not just, you think it's going to be easy, right? I'm just checking a box at the end of the day. Every time you check that box, you are being confronted with having to accurately reflect on how your chronic illness is impacting your life. And you're really having to be honest about it. And that can take a huge emotional toll on you as a person. So whenever I work with someone on symptom tracking, I recommend that we only track maximum 3 symptoms at a time, because like I said, it builds up and you sometimes don't even notice how much hard work it is until you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. Right. And it's like, I'm just going to give up on this whole symptom tracking thing. So 3 symptoms at a time. I also recommend some sort of way to support your mental health during that time. So whatever it is for you, that's a good mood lifter. Like, we really need to kind of dive into that and make sure we're practicing that regularly while we're doing symptom tracking. And then once you get the data that you need for, whatever it is that you're trying to bring to your rheumatologist, stop symptom tracking. Obviously we're all different and there's no absolutes in life, but I think for the majority of people, we don't need to track symptoms every single day. It's overwhelming. It's exhausting. It really takes a toll on your mental health. And when you're constantly analyzing every little twitch and pain, that's too much. That's going to take over your life. So I really don't recommend doing it for a long period of time for the majority of people that I work with.
In general, how do you think behavioral science and kind of your job has changed your life in particular?
Yeah, behavioral science, I think, has made me a much more compassionate person, because I have learned how behaviors come to be. I think that there's a very common mistake that we make to internalize qualities in people. So like someone drops out of a PhD program, right? Let's say their values changed and they no longer want to achieve that goal and they want to go do something else. Some people may pass judgment and say, they couldn't stick it out, right? Like they gave up. They're a quitter, right? Those are some labels that we put on those kinds of behaviors. But cognitive or behavioral science like tells us that we are a product of our environment and what's going on inside of us and the history of behaviors that we have engaged in the past. And so what I think is really cool about cognitive and behavioral science is that it gives you responsibility in a really unique way. It allows you to take ownership of your own behavior, but at the same time, it doesn't blame you for things. And I think that's something that I really enjoy seeing a shift. I do think that there's kind of a shift. Maybe that will happen someday. But I think in schools, we see it where more and more teachers are learning not to blame students for problem behavior, but rather they're asking themselves, what about this environment? What about this setup is not working for this person? And how can we make it such that it does work for this person? And being a little bit more compassionate to the people around us.
You're kind of like very motivational and inspiring. I feel like a lot of the things that you've mentioned, we do know about behavioral science, but we just don't think about it so in depth. I like to kind of end off with an advice segment. What is one piece of advice you would give to youth who are having trouble kind of coming to terms with their condition, and they're kind of like disregarding it and they're just like, in terms of their behavior?
Yeah, so I think there are two ways to answer this question. The first is to give like a concrete answer, and then the next is kind of to speak more broadly. So I want to kind of do both of those. The first route, when we think about a concrete action that you can take, I would suggest finding either a good therapist or a coach. They're very different processes and they work well for different people. So it may be that you do both, or it may be that therapy works better for you, or it may be that coaching works better for you. But I do think finding someone who's not a parent, who's not a friend, who's not a rheumatologist, to help kind of guide you through all of the roller coasters of this chronic illness and this disease that you're having to manage, that may be very different than the majority of the immediate friends in your circle are dealing with. I think that can make a huge difference. Like, you absolutely do not have to do it alone. I know that I got diagnosed with my chronic illness later in life, but with my mental health challenges, I thought I had to do it alone. And I was so wrong. And I really wish that I had pushed harder to get better support. So you definitely don't have to do it alone. And so I really recommend reaching out for, a good therapist or a good coach. I also think, if that's not really your jam, social media can be a really amazing place. The chronic illness community, there's Reddit threads, there's Instagram communities, whatever your preferred mode is. There are some amazing people that you can meet on those modalities that have really helped me. And then the second kind of piece of advice, I think, is more broader, hopefully some bit of inspiration, because I think that can be really helpful when it hits you at the right moment. So, your diagnoses, they don't make you any less you than you always have been. You get to choose how you show up in the world. So that's your choice. Some days that's going to be easier than others. So have compassion for yourself on those tougher days. You're not expected to show up in the world every day in the exact same way. Your disease is dynamic, your life is dynamic, you are dynamic. You can show up however you need to on that day. And you don't have to have it all figured out right now. In fact, you may never have it figured out. I'm in my 30s and I don't think I have it figured out. So spoiler alert, you may not have it all figured out ever, but I think that's part of the beauty of the journey called life. So, just slow down, tune in, and enjoy the ride.
I just wanted to kind of bring it back to the part where you said the chronic illness community and the community that's out there. And that's kind of how I reached out to you, because you don't realize how many people are kind of going through the same journey as you till you read social media. And I was still on social media, but still didn't know that there's so many advocates on social media ready to engage with your content, but also ready to get involved, giving you advice, just so you can kind of see different perspectives. And that's sort of what both of us are doing in our own different ways. Definitely, I hope no one feels alone. They shouldn't feel alone, but we know what the process is like.
Yes, definitely know what their process is like. I think it's very normal to go through those periods where you do feel alone. But like you said, you're not alone. There are other people who are going through it.
Thank you so much, Kristen,
Thank
for
you.
coming on today. I really had a wonderful conversation with you, and we touched upon so many topics. And I hope a lot of people learn from all these topics and get inspired, hopefully, read more about behavioral science. So everyone check out Kristen's social media channels. I've actually linked it down below. Like, comment, subscribe, share this episode. Bye.
Bye.
I can't hide, 'cause growing pains are keeping me up and